another episode of Dad's Planning Politics.
Welcome back. We're happy to have you again. We're doing an episode on Friday today because things got a bit out of hand yesterday. So trying to catch up, get all the information out to you guys because we know that you're just waiting patiently, ready to hear everything we have to say, of course, because you're our loyal followers. So lots of stuff has happened this week, of course. It was a bit rainy today, that's why my hair looks so terrible. Just so everyone's aware, so they don't start critiquing me and saying I have had a bad hair day. It's actually not my fault. I can't change the weather. But yeah, we're gonna go into today. We're gonna go into the meeting of the South African leader with Trump in the Oval Office. You know, similar levels of drama to when Zelensky met with Trump. We're going to talk about that, about Elon's part in that. We're going to talk about the assassination of 2 Israeli embassy staff in Washington. We're going to talk about the big, beautiful bill, the new thing that Trump has put through, although getting a bit sick of talking about Trump, to be honest, as everyone is. Going to talk a little bit about Gaza, just a little bit, and then get into everything that's been happening in the Australian election and the fallout of it, because it just keeps coming. It really does. I think this has been one of the most interesting election campaigns in recent years. I don't know if you would agree, Father, but that's my
Yes,
opinion.
very much agree. So, shall we start with Ramaphosa and the South Africans in the Oval Office?
Yes.
Like you said, somewhat of a repeat of the Zelensky meeting. For those of you who weren't aware or didn't see it, Trump was with all of his staff in the Oval Office with Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, and his staff. And then it was all joking and pleasant, talking about golf, etc. And then one of Trump's staff put up this video talking about this discrimination against white farmers and land being taken, etc., etc. And clearly the South African delegation hadn't been briefed on this or anything. And then Trump had newspaper articles about this. So it was kind of super embarrassing for everyone there. The South African president remained rather calm. I think he was rather shell-shocked. And then an Afrikaans business person from South Africa who knew Trump and who helped set up the meeting said, in fact, there's discrimination against white and black farmers, etc., and violence. It's not just targeted towards white. And then they left. So it was a pretty dramatic meeting, and interesting to see what the ongoing fallout will be.
Definitely it is. I mean, I think it's interesting that of course, it's intended to be embarrassing, and to a certain group of people who are watching these talks, it is embarrassing. But, it's the same as with what happened with Zelensky. Zelensky didn't turn into a laughingstock for much of the world. Trump became an even bigger laughingstock. And I think that's the same thing that's happening here, right? Like, obviously, if you set up a meeting, blindside someone to the, information you're about to show, you conveniently pick 5 different videos that could be distorted or changed in any way and label them what you want to label them, and shock people by playing them at the right moment. Of course you're going to win the argument. That goes without saying, but that's not how real business and real foreign policy is done. Because it's just the shock factor, and there's only so far the shock factor can go. I mean,
But
I know as well that what were you going to say?
Well, I
Sorry.
was going to say, if you let me speak, um, this is Trump's idea, right? That he wants to get his moment in the spotlight and then move on to something else. This is all
Yeah.
designed for that thing. This is the 20 minutes of excitement for the media, and then it will move on. The roadshow will move on to something new. So I think Trump achieves his objective, and the question is, they weren't denying this thing about these white farmers. I'm sure this violence happens to black farmers as well, but it's pretty bad if that's happening to those white farmers, right? It reminds me
Okay.
of Zimbabwe from years
Okay.
gone by.
Let's be careful here what you're saying. I know that you want to appear a bit more controversial, but I don't think you should start saying that this is similar to apartheid. I think you should be careful, Dada, because that's kind of a step too far.
No,
It's
I'm
very
not saying that.
obvious.
Don't jump to
It's
that
very
conclusion.
No, I know, but I'm just saying it's very obvious that Elon is incredibly racist, and the fact that he is calling them a white genocide. I mean, this government that they have in place right now is far more progressive than past governments. What was Zuma was his name, right? The previous
Super
leader.
corrupt.
Yeah, he was incredibly corrupt, and the current leader, Ramaphosa, yeah, that's his name.
Hmm.
He was a friend of Nelson Mandela. I'm fairly sure he has connections in that way. And you look, there is some conservative elements of his policy, like when it comes to mining and such like that. But he has actually led quite a progressive government and like seeking constitutional change and reform, etc., etc. So if you're going to say that in in the space where that government is in charge, you're going to start making any claims of genocide. Genocide is a ridiculous claim to be making.
I
Sure,
didn't know
make a
they
claim
claimed
that
to
there's some.
genocide.
No,
No, I
no, they claimed it was a white genocide. Trump said you're committing white genocide.
okay. Well, I don't want to claim that. All I'm saying is they're taking potentially what I'm reading is they're taking properties from white farmers and other farmers, right? And I don't think
Mm.
that's right. That's just like happened in Zimbabwe, and it was a total disaster.
It's actually not the same. I've read into it. The actual policy is when a piece of land, is not being used for anything, or it's like deserted or whatever, like someone's run out of money and so the developer has left it. The government has passed a bill which means they're allowed to claim the land and repurpose it for something else or sell it off to other people. We have very similar bills in Australia and similar ones in America as well. The one in America is incredibly similar, but obviously the Trump administration will use something like that and distort it in a way to get a good story out of it and to get a good narrative, right?
I'm sorry, I'm just confused. If somebody owns the land, whether
Can't
they're
you like
using it or
listen to
not,
me
how
rather
is
than
it taken
say
off them?
you're confused? I'm telling you that this is a normal policy. It's like it's in the case where maybe someone doesn't own the land anymore. Maybe it's like it's deserted, etc., etc. Look, I'm not a lawyer. I haven't gone into every single detail about it. People listening, feel free to go into it. But I'm fairly sure it's common practice, or at least the law they've put in is very similar to one that's already in place in the US. So, at least from a hypocritical point of view, it's ridiculous for the Trump administration to be criticizing it when they have
Well,
a very similar one.
I don't understand that scenario, right? Because what I read is if somebody's land's being taken off them by the government and they didn't agree to that, that's bad. Okay, so where there's smoke, there's fire in this situation, right? And it's not like the South African president denied this and said this wasn't the case, and could clearly say it. I didn't hear that coming up even during or post the interview.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I think that I have to get back to you on this and I will go away. And I wasn't prepared to handle an onslaught of
That's not
disbelief
an
from you
onslaught. I
about
just
this issue.
disagree with your
So
premise.
I know, but I wasn't getting this information from unreliable sources as well. And I think that you're very quick to start judging
No,
an
let's
administration
look
in South
into it further.
Africa. I think that look at the facts of the situation is that this administration is far more progressive than other ones have been. The Trump administration is obviously not. The Trump administration is known to lie about everything, and there are like reputable news sources like the BBC saying that the law is incredibly similar to one that has recently been passed in America, and it's like
Oh, well,
it's like
let's
the
let's
same thing.
let's come back to it in a future
And
episode
you're
and,
saying
and
you just
delve
disagree.
and delve into the detail. That would be good.
Yeah, let's, because I'd be happy to go into detail on it. And South Africa is incredibly, I think it's one of the most polarized countries in the world still in terms of like political ideology, etc. So, there's a lot going on there and it is interesting. So we should do an episode on that.
Okay, great idea. And so, should we move on to the big beautiful bill?
Mm. Yes, but I do just want to say that when it comes to these, because Trump did say white genocide, I'm quoting him. I'm not making that up. I'm quoting what he said. He said to Ramaphosa in the meeting, there's this white genocide. How is this happening? It's disgusting, etc., etc. And these are the same claims that Elon has been making for a long time. And in recent months, Trump has begun to echo the same things. So I
I know,
wanted to
but if
say
they've
that I
been
think
made
it's
for a long
interesting.
time, the South Africans should have had a good response to that, and I didn't hear it.
Okay, I was actually going to make a different point, and you're still trying to just like come
No, no,
back and
okay.
disagree with me. I was going to say that it's interesting that that Elon still has such an important part to play in the Trump administration, given all of those news agencies, etc., thought that he was going to be ousted by now. I think that that's
He's
another
still got a
interesting
huge
element
influence
of it
because he's
all.
still a
He
huge
still has huge
funder of the.
influence,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
ever
I did
more
not.
influence, but that's also an interesting thing. That's all I was going to say. Right?
Okay.
Okay, let's move on. Go
Um,
on, talk about
the
your big, beautiful bill.
Well, it's not mine. It's Trump's big beautiful bill,
I know,
and
but you're excited about it.
this is no. I'm not that excited about it. It's huge reductions in taxes. It's peeling back the sustainability actions that the Biden administration put in place. It's reducing healthcare funding. So it's going to have pretty dramatic impact. There's going to be many more millions of Americans without healthcare. It's turning back the action on climate change, and it's going to reduce taxes for many, many people for a period of time from 25 to 29, I think it is. US debt is through the roof. US bonds are at record highs. So remember, if, for those who don't know, US bonds are how the US government borrows money from the rest of the world. And of course, they have to pay an interest rate for people to loan them money. And that interest rate is higher than ever before because people around the world are worried about the level of US debt and what this will do. So this could all
Yeah,
cause another wobble on the stock market like the tariffs. So in a way, it's like round two of the tariffs. It's his domestic policy, which just passed the House by one vote. There were several Republicans who didn't vote for it and voted against it, and one who abstained. So pretty close. And now it has to go to the Senate for approval. But this is pretty mad. This is madness from an economic point of view.
yeah. Yep, yeah, it definitely is. I also think it's interesting, like, one of the major parts of this bill is the mass deportations that have now been scheduled, which I think is one of the most important things realistically when we're looking at that, given the rates of deportations are already worsening. So there's been a lot of money allocated for that, and also the
That's
building of a
good.
new border wall. So we're going back to the idea of building a wall. That has not been forgotten. It is still his passion project, and we will see Trump making that happen at some point in the next few years. Yeah, I just know it's quite interesting. I've talked about this in an older episode, but I did a look into like the deportation system and the way that it works, right? When you're found like guilty of being illegally in the country, then you get a court case set that you must go to, and then you must, like be found like guilty, etc., and then you can be deported, but you can't actually be deported until then. And I know that the system is already incredibly behind, so it's all well and good for Trump to say we're going to do mass deportations, but the actual system for the deportations isn't working effectively. And so people who, like Trump, wanted to be deported years ago are still in the country awaiting their court date. And this issue continues until, Trump probably gets frustrated, just starts sending people out without giving them their court date, which is completely denying,
Mhm.
their legal rights. So that'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
But Freddie, part
But
of this
yeah.
bill was to put huge extra funding and people into it to ensure that you could sustain a very significant number of deportations. And by the way, this is the element of Trump's agenda that is most popular with his base. This is the thing they feel like he's actually achieving, and that's what they wanted him to achieve. So it's the most positive part about his popularity, not the economy, not other things, but this immigration stance.
Of course not the economy. It's also well and good to say that he it's still incredibly popular on his front. But I don't know if any of our listeners have seen this, but there was a recent Senate race that ended. A new senator was elected, and in a very like proudly Republican state, I'm fairly sure, with a massive swing to the Democrats, and the
Mhm.
Democratic senator was elected. So I don't know what that says for greater America, but it's really a statement that if a Democrat can be elected in a proud red state, what's going to happen in the next election when that happens? And
Oh,
what does that say about Trump's popularity in the country in general?
I think you're right. Longer term, Freddie, by the midterms, I think some of this will be coming home to roost.
Mm.
i.e., many of the supporters of Trump losing their health care, etc. But at the moment, this immigration policy, and I would contend the immigration policy will still remain popular as it is around the world. Even the Democrats, if they win in the next election, they will have a tough immigration policy, okay? Because things have changed in the US, and that's what Americans want now. Just like, in a way, Australia has a much tougher immigration policy than the US and has done for years. Hopefully, we
Disgusting
do it in a
immigration
more
policy.
humane way than the US, but that's popular. People like it.
Well, ours is not more humane. I mean, at detention centers and everything, no one ever does anything about that. We can talk about that at another point about the
That's a
major
long
parties and
topic.
everything. But I've just said that in previous episodes, you know, these are the problems with the major parties. Like, right, these countries, America, Australia, whatever, they have these fundamental issues that no one is willing to target except the independents and the really small, minor voices. So in America, that's a big problem because obviously you only have two major parties that are vying for power. So you don't really have people out there to represent the average American. You know, a lot
But
of people
Freddie,
aren't being represented.
right-wing populists only get power when governments are loose on immigration. When you're not loose on immigration, right-wing populists do not come to power. That is
Right-wing
the
populists
trend
come
throughout
to
the world.
power when when there is like a recession and when there's global, like insecurity about like disease and
And
conflict,
insecurity
etc.,
about,
etc.
lack
Yes,
of
and that
housing,
happens
inflation,
because
because of
of all the other
immigration.
stuff. It
I
happens
know.
because of the global recession.
Yeah, but it's multiple reasons why it happened. So
No, but it's
that's
an
the argument.
ongoing effect.
Yeah, well, that's the argument. Multiple reasons.
Because I think
Should
when you say stuff like, oh, populist leaders only come to power when people are worried about immigration, obviously people get selfish in times of low economic growth, etc., etc. That's like a
but
natural thing. It's all
but
about
look at Australia. The
self-preservation.
immigration process is under control, okay, and thus Albanese wins a increased majority, right?
I
If it
know, I'm
was
not
out of
disagreeing with you.
okay,
I'm not disagreeing with you. It's
all
fine.
right,
I was just adding a different point.
okay. Um, Terrible murder of two Jewish diplomats in New York overnight.
In
A
Washington,
young
D.C., actually, it wasn't New York.
New York, Washington, yeah.
Two
Um,
Israeli embassy staff.
yeah, horrible
Mm.
stuff happening there. And you're probably going to say not surprising because of the terrible things that Israel is doing in the
Well,
Gaza
of
Strip.
course, I'm going to say not surprising. Regardless of what my political belief is, I'm going to say that it's not surprising. Like, it isn't
Mhm.
surprising that stuff like that is happening. And America is becoming a scarier, scary place in terms of political violence, right? Obviously, we look back to what happened with Trump and the assassination attempts. Regardless of what anyone thinks, that shouldn't be happening to anyone. Because
Agreed.
it raises the normal. There's like that what's it called, psychological theory, I can't remember the name, but when you make the new normal for something, that people just get shot at every now and again when they're running
Right.
for president, it gets to the point where everyone's being shot at if they're running for president, and then you end
Right.
up in a situation like Mexico where like half the candidates for president are shot dead before they even
Yeah.
reach the election.
Terrible.
Like, it will just worsen because people get used to the new normal, and that's what's really worrying about this in America, right? We've seen people like Luigi Mangione, for example, who obviously shot the United Healthcare CEO. We see him being glorified on the media for shooting someone, and I
Mhm.
personally don't understand that because I don't think that it should ever be allowed. You
Warranted.
should ever not
No.
be condoning that, because you condoning that and supporting him in that has led to acts like this happening to these
Agreed.
two young, like this young couple about to be married, you know, like they have their lives ahead of them. Regardless of anything else, they should not be being shot dead. I know it's an act of political expression, though,
Oh,
and I
it's
know that
awful.
the person who did it said, "Free Palestine," and it's just horrific because obviously we know that everything happening in Gaza has not changed, and it has only worsened and worsened and worsened. So there's only so much people can take, and people really need to start acting on it. Otherwise, the world's going to become a much scarier place, and
Hmm.
more political acts of expression will continue to happen, and maybe more people will continue to die.
Well,
So,
well, France and UK and Canada overnight came out and strongly criticised Israel and said they will start and put sanctions on Israel if they continue down this path.
well,
So
that
it's
was
the first time.
also because, as I was mentioning to you, there were some diplomats, I think from France, some European diplomats, I think Canada as well, um, who were in Israel, and there were some shots from Israeli soldiers that very narrowly missed them.
Oh,
And
wow.
the Israeli soldiers came back and said they were warning shots, like warning, stay out of this territory, this is not for you, like you shouldn't be here. And obviously, those governments have not responded well to that because they were diplomats from their
Right.
countries. So we see how, the situation is just worsening across the world, right? Like, it's a lot of tension, a lot of
Yep. There is.
tension. And yeah, the sanctions are going to continue. And I know that the Austrian winner of Eurovision, he came out saying that Israel shouldn't be allowed to compete in Eurovision next year because they still were allowed to compete this year and last year, even with a lot of anger from the international community. They've been allowed to
Mhm.
continue. So, Eurovision is a representation of like what Europe is as a whole and like the community of Europe. And so allowing them to continue performing is really quite a statement. Um,
Yep. No,
but
very cool
yeah,
statement. Shall we segue to Australia?
no. We also need to talk a little bit more about the fact I know you don't like talking about it because obviously Gaza isn't a fun topic to talk about, but it's an incredibly important one. Um, I know that the blockade on aid that has been going on for 11 weeks by the Israeli military is now being lifted somewhat, and some aid has been allowed in, but they're incredibly close to reaching an all-out famine. There's like horrific accounts of how all how 40,000 babies will die in the next week or something because of the lack of resources to keep them alive, that kidney dialysis treatments have gone up the record numbers because people are being forced to drink salt water because there's no access to fresh water. The desalination plants have stopped working because they don't get fuel in from outside the blockade. And so the hospital system is just getting more and more stressed every day. And since the Israeli campaign on Gaza started, 53,000 people have died. 53,000, which is a really big number, and it's not halting anytime soon. So that's what I'm going to say about that.
Okay.
I think that it's a good reminder for all of you out there, whether you agree or whatever, go read a little bit about it, think about what's happening there, think about how it's affecting these children and these families,
It's a
and
great point, Freddie. Everyone should
feel a bit of
read about
empathy.
this and know about it.
Yeah.
Uh, so, if we now move on to Australia, the fallout from the election is really on the coalition. For those who are not political geeks and just bring you up to speed,
But they probably
um,
are if they're listening to our
if they're
podcast,
listening
to
to
be
this,
fair.
hopefully you are, or you enjoy this somewhat. Um, the Liberal Party and the Nationals had a split earlier in the week. The Nationals said they were taking their ball and going home, and they based it around the fact that there was four policy points. One was nuclear. One was this investment in the bush. I forget what the other two were, but there was
I
four.
know what they were. It was
Were they?
committing to regional infrastructure
Yeah, that
future
was the
funding,
investment in the
lifting the
bush.
ban on nuclear energy service obligations for regional areas, etc., etc. So stuff like
Okay.
that, which is actually quite fair things to be asking for. The nuclear energy one is obviously a bit more divisive,
No,
but
but
if
the
we're
new.
talking about committing to regional infrastructure funding,
Yeah, yeah.
obviously the Nationals going to be asking for that.
So the thing that Susan Lay asked of David Littleproud was, I need
David
cabinet,
Littleproud is the leader for the Nationals, just in case people
yes,
aren't
I
aware.
need cabinet solidarity. So people cannot speak on their own behalf without agreeing with the cabinet of what we're going to say, a coordinated communication strategy, which is essential for any government. Now, supposedly David Littleproud didn't agree to that, and that was the core sticking point. But then in his party room, he didn't mention that. Okay, and so then when all the nationals like Bridget McKenzie, etc., on 7:30 report and this talks, the funny thing I heard about this was that the ABC actually brought the coalition together through all their appearances on the 7:30 report, which is ironic given that the coalition often talks about the nasty and evil ABC. So they could have actually
Hate
done
media.
the coalition hate media. That's right, a service here. So in the end, they're now talking about getting back together. I think David Littleproud's under huge pressure from Barnaby Joyce and other ex-leaders of the coalition. He looks really nervous, and in a way, it's probably good for Susan Lee that she allowed them to leave. As our listeners know, I recommended this some episodes ago that they should split from the Nationals for a period of time. I just thought the Liberals would ask the Nationals to leave as opposed to the
Congrats.
Nationals. And, because the Liberal Party has to move back to the centre. So it'll be interesting how this plays out. But I don't know what you thought of the whole fracas, Freddie.
I don't know anymore. I mean, the Liberals have a big job ahead of them, right, defining who they want to be, and it really depends on that plan whether they should be united with the Nationals or not, right? Do they want to appeal more to the rural sides of Australia and adopt a far more Nationals personality? And also reduce their extremist point of view, or do they want to go far more moderate and appeal to university educated voters again, like they used to be? So we'll see what happens with that. Um, I think it's interesting. Obviously, it's the first split in 38 years of the coalition. It's quite interesting to see how Jacinta, I mean, oh my
Susan,
gosh, no, no,
Susan
no, no,
Lane.
Jacinta Price.
Oh, Jacinta Price, yes.
Yeah, Jacinta Price. Sorry, I forgot her. I was thinking Jacinta Ardern kept coming to my mind, and I was like, they are not the same person whatsoever.
Definitely
Um,
not.
Jacinta Price, how she will navigate this, since obviously she just switched party rooms to the Liberals, and now no one in the Liberals is very happy with her because she didn't run for deputy as she said she was going to if Angus Taylor became the leader of the Liberals. And, the Nationals aren't very happy with her because she left them. So, really, I don't know what that woman will be doing
I think I
with
think
her
they
future
bought
political career.
I think they got nervous about this split because the way it works, the Liberal Party would be the official opposition and get all the funding to support that,
Mm,
whereas the Nationals would lose that. Okay, and the
mm.
Nationals senators in the Senate, like Bridget McKenzie, would lose her spot because it's based on a coalition spot. So the Nationals had a lot to lose here, and the fact is the only way for the Liberals to move forward is to regain the centre. As I've mentioned before, someone else, a pundit, was talking about this the other day. Some sort of alliance with the Teals over time, and they have to bring the Nationals to account. They've got to come to some scenario where the Nationals are happy. But I think the interesting thing about nuclear, clearly nuclear is not a goer in the Australian economy, but the whole concept of lifting the moratorium on nuclear and having it as an option, it's probably an option we're never going to take. But just having it as an option, I think is actually a rather smart strategy because it's an Achilles heel of Labor that they don't even look at it and don't even consider it, right? And I don't think it's a huge issue, but I think it's a way that the Liberals and the Nationals can come together on this.
I don't know. I think it's another one of those topics that why do we need to create such bipartisan competition on it as a topic? I'm not really so convinced
Well, the
about that.
theory
I think that
is
it's fine to keep the moratorium on it because I'm not really in supportive of nuclear for Australia at this point in time, with everything else that we have going on. So therefore, I wouldn't advocate for that.
but
Um,
there is an argument that in a modern economy, long term, you're going to need some nuclear, long term, right? There is an argument for that, but anyway, that's an argument for another
if
day.
you put the money that you were willing to put into building these nuclear reactors, into building renewable energy sites, we would be okay. It's just that people don't want to invest that level of money
No, all I'm saying is
into
I'm
that
fully
stuff.
on board with all the renewables and doing all that long term. I'm saying when it makes market sense, okay, you should actually be technology agnostic. If if nuclear makes more sense than renewables, which it doesn't at the moment, but if it did at some point in the future, you should be open to that. That's the theoretical point
But
I'm
what
making.
I'm saying is it doesn't make market sense at the moment, and I don't think it will, and I think it will continue to make less sense, and I think it will continue to become less prevalent because also there have been massive advances in different types of renewable energy, like all the different types of hydrogen, energy, blue hydrogen, etc., pink hydrogen. There are massive
Pink
advances being made in
hydrogen, what
that.
is that?
Yeah, you should look into it. There's all
Okay,
these
well,
different types um of hydrogen energy production that there are advances in, and that's only going to get better and better. That is the new future of energy, and it has impressive capabilities,
okay.
but no one's investing
Good.
in
Maybe
that.
we could do
Australia
an
did have a
episode on
little bit.
hydrogen
We
and
can, but
such going forward.
Australia has a few investments in that area, but we should really ramp it up because that's what we can lean on in the future. I just don't think that nuclear is really a necessary thing to look into. But I'm also interested if do you think they wanted to do this split up just for a bit of attention, just to see what would happen?
No,
Because
I think
no,
I think the Liberals have been totally shocked by this defeat. I think the Nationals, in a stupid kind of way, feel like it's not their problem; it's the Liberals' problem. They didn't
mm,
lose any seats; they're fine.
mm,
And so it's a completely different view. And Susan Ley, if she has any chance of continuing as the leader, needs to do radical transformation of the Liberal Party.
yeah.
And I was pleased to see that they chose Susan Lee. So at least they're on the right path. If they'd chosen Angus Taylor, it's like you should close the doors and turn the lights off.
That's true. I agree. And I mean, I think if the Liberal Party was to succeed, I can see a situation where they move far more to the centre, far more pushing Labour back. Oh, my microphone. Pushing Labour back a bit more to the left. And then some of the Teals, who are in those positions right now, then join the Liberal Party.
Yes, totally agree.
But that would have to be a massive transition.
You heard it
And then
here
I think
first.
that it and then I think it is a very good thing for them to be splitting the coalition because they can't continue to have they can't continue to have such similar policies to the Nationals. They can still form a coalition with the Nationals sometimes if they need to enter government, etc., but they shouldn't base all their policy off having like an identified like unitary stance. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like they
No,
can come together on policy, but
they're going to need to do real policy work and differentiate their policy and
mm,
really go back to those liberal values of aspiration and freedom to choose
steady
how you want to
leadership
live your life, etc.,
and
etc.
liberalism.
Yeah. So anyway, it'll
Because
be
it's
very
really
interesting to watch.
ironic. Well, it's really ironic that they're called the Liberal Party, but
I know
obviously they don't
exactly.
have very liberal values. I think that the whole world finds that a bit confusing. If they ever look into Australian politics, they're like, who are these bods meant to be? We don't understand
Exactly.
where they're even coming from. But that's
Well,
interesting. And I wonder if Tony Abbott and John Howard making public statements asking the parties to reunite had any impact on
maybe
them
not Tony
deciding to
Abbott, but
come
I
back
think John
together.
Howard. Yes, he's still
John Howard,
regarded as
surely. And before we
joining
finish
the
up,
party.
I would just say I think it's really interesting an update on Bradfield, the seat between Giselle Captarian, who's a Liberal candidate, and Nicolette Bowl. She's the Independent. The margin has narrowed incredibly to only 7 votes. 7 votes. So
Crazy.
it's funny when we were talking about our friends the other day and who they were voting for living in this area because who they voted for really mattered.
Yep, it really mattered.
If they had voted for the other candidate, it could have had huge repercussions. So
It's
they're
very
still
true.
determining what's happening there. It's narrowing more and more every
I
day.
know
One of
they're
the
going to have to
tightest
do an
races
audit,
in
right, of the
Australian
results
history.
to do.
Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
great chatting with you as usual, Freddie, and hopefully you've enjoyed this fast-moving episode. Again, please subscribe to us on YouTube, like us, share with your friends. We've
Like
got
us.
and that would be great. And again, we would love comments and questions. I know we got a comment or question from Howard asking us to look at the Romanian elections, so we'll have a look at that in the next episode. Shout out to Howard Digby. All right, thanks all. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys. We love you.